Barjo Simchen Tamche Dewa Dan De Gyodan Dembar Simchen Tamche Dungal Dan Dungal Ji Gyodan Dawar Yuji Simchen Tamche Dungal Mebe Dewa Dan Medawa Simchen Tamche Nyeri Jadan Nidan Nyamla Nebar Gyuruji Simchen Tamche Dewa Dan Devi Gyodan Dembar Yuji Simchen Tamche Dungal Dan Dungal Ji Gyodan Dawar Simchen Tamche Dungal Mebe Dewa Dan Medawa Yuji Simchen Tamche Nyeri Jadan Nidan Nyamla Nebar Gyuruji Azajabye Choje Doida Re Ravali Jaye Jaye Bandi Sanye Do Me De Oye In English.
From now until my enlightenment, I take a refuge as Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. And by creating this practice, may I attain the state of Buddhahood for the benefit of all sentient beings. From now until my enlightenment, I take refuge in the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. And by the merit created in this practice, may I attain the state of Buddhahood for the benefit of all sentient beings. From now until my enlightenment, I take refuge in the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. And by the merit created in this practice, may I attain the state of Buddhahood for the benefit of all sentient beings. May all sentient beings enjoy happiness in its causes. May all sentient beings be free from suffering and its causes. May all sentient beings never be separate from joyful bliss. May all sentient beings abide in equanimity, free of bias, attachment, and anger. May all sentient beings enjoy happiness and its causes. May all sentient beings be free from suffering and its causes. May all sentient beings never be separate from joyful bliss. May all sentient beings abide in equanimity, free of bias, attachment. May all sentient beings enjoy happiness and its causes. May all sentient beings be free from suffering and its causes. May all sentient beings never be separate from joyful bliss. May all sentient beings abide in equanimity, free of bias, attachment, and anger. This ground and ornament perfume strewn with flowers, Mahameru, encircled by the four continents, surrounded by the sun and moon. I visualize this Buddha field and I offer it. May all living beings enjoy the pure land. Idam Guru Ratnamandala Kamini Yatayami.
I should delete all. 소재 T 소재 주
No, so.
소재 주는 T T yeah T 저 주면
No, 죽을
so the thing that teach you na mis chidani to jundu kyamoro mo chigi yanse chi nonden na ne ani di sungi duro ati ya sungde di kache penchen shake shake sungjire sungresha dinala ni dinadewa chosongo den nam ka kamashu tuna kunje 동아 계속 캠버쇼 어제 뒤균 동아저 즉 삼로 캐주어당 덴데 콜라직 숨르샤 단다디나 숨바나진 게직 기나 아니 대화 소소가 가서 나당 나랑 수레지 바이나 직 기베 값수 되게니 기베 대화가 소소는 반드시 사바이나 되니 직 심전 탐제라 펜바당 직 배는 남과 강월 쇼스 돼서 직 먼저 뒤견도 있는 직 가심보다 띵서보다 딜라이니 삼로다야다 되니 다직 먼저 내 나자 가리나 직 알아서 상황 직 뒤견도 직 예버도시 용거를 가만 보실라 디 값수양 오늘 기초경 기간가 아니 다직 동아 내 나자 디기 심전 탐제기 동아 소바 된디기 소소기 에네직 다 쿠레니 삼로도다 벤데케네 에네 디게네 동아 에네직 현재 에네 매바 쇼 삼바다 즉 동아 계속 감바 쇼 송바나 진기 된데 뒤니 견도 에네직 캐친 즉 캐친 부치마도 에네 군론 된데 삼보 케네네 된데 낭 투와 에네 즉 야고 요레스 즉 주는
Consumed.
되나 이근도 에네 때문에 뭐지 사실 명님의 양세야 그게 되셔
Um, there's a verse that His Holiness the Dalai Lama often um, remind us, and this verse is from Kashmiri Pandit Shakyashri, and the verse says, "When I'm happy, may my merit flow to others. May joy and benefit fill the sky. When I'm unhappy, may the sorrow of all beings be mine. May the ocean of suffering run dry." So, regardless of how much actually you can engage in the practice of benefiting others, at least you can maintain this kind of attitude, in your daily kind of life. Whenever you experience and enjoy happiness, pleasure, trying to or virtuous, actions, try to have that kind of, experience. to benefit all others, and others can experience, the same kind of joy, happiness, engaging in virtuous actions, and through that it can benefit, unlimited numbers of sentient beings, as if kind of like the extent of sky, and and uh, and when you experience on the other side, when you experience illness, problems, difficulty, you also visualize as if you are going to suffer this on behalf of all others who are suffering, and going through the illness, pain, problem, like drying up the ocean. So when you have such kind of attitudes, way of thinking in your daily life, this would be very kind of sort of helpful or good practice.
어디 쉬었다 어디 인터넷에 드린 게 되게 비토 시시도 당한 다른 남경기 인텔럽 센터가 라디 쪽으로 근데 롭센티가 다른 디나라 송바나 젠테 똑바다 드린 지단에 근데 로리 등기 첨바스나 디는 여와 레버가 봐 똑바다 도미기 로즈 지단다 단데
세마다 세명이 말이야.
첨바다 치민 중에 똑바다 도메도 말베
너보다만 가져다 자수 삼수. 너보다만 가져다 자수.
그다 사네 그산디들 딘마 경을 찍는 사인바
경어지도 너보다 동매질 되면데.
어디시 딩면 경어지 되게 원래 사인바 사인
나도 너보다 동매지.
단단히 지단이 단단한 베베나라 토파 토메 지단이야 토파라네 직 인지널을 교단 하가 이거다 지단이 아주 또또단 토파를 남긴 서 디시오 당은저 당연한 토파는 집어든 집어래데 이 다자 하가요 또직 무슨도 토파다 또 무슨도 토파라이죠 무슨도 토파다 단다 토파다 토메라 그래서 디 tanda di dadan chikwaari di kosa khagaro wandi di shiyori ta chidani tanda di toba tome ki namzalo chidani chik toba ki shedan ro mitimba mangpo shiyosari ta di nal sumba nashin chene tang di shuya ki di chene yagos.
And the topic that we are going to go through today is conceptual and non-conceptual. If you have a book, it's on page 60, unmarked, page 65. Conceptual and non-conceptual, Tibetan word topa, it can have a different connotation depending on the context that they use in the direct perception and indirect perception. But regardless, we will go according to how it is presented in our book, the meaning of this term, conceptual and non-conceptual.
어디지 다나지 디나라 다랑 숨반나진 게 지단이 또 단다디 똑바다 또메 그런 게 있는 개발 숨반나진 딜라니 똑바다 또메라 언제 개발돼서 순서로 민다와 가까이 지어서 다나진 디나와 저당 우다남제 제목군들 덴즈나라니 즉 그런서 제목 슝딩알라 담반나진 게 디나라니 즉 순샤바 페나 아니 즉 저기나라 아니 즉 장율란 주비 징벤나발라 주비 샘중실라 아니 도발라야 시비 수진주 시비 수진주비 샘중실라 줘봐서 페나다 즉 다치가 다 분당한 쪽이 콜라와도 오시 된데 제바는 즉 다 라바다 즉 라바다 차와다 라바도 오시 술로 다 시바제도 잡아라 차와도 징바제도 잡아라 라베 술이 라바기 술이 아니 된데 주변 샘젤라니 도바다 시다즉 타위 술진 주변 샘젤라 아니 줘봐 도바다 줘봐서 된데 지금 전에 송바데 된데 지다 된데 우다남전에 다 지금 송바데 다런데 감순가는 게 세대기 니나 노베 차지게 센터 sem중 도벌 송바데 세미 어디지 다디 온다다 어디 다른 근데 도 차트고 돌아 다디는마 di shung de la ti chene chemi shung de number to ba kang ge shwe do mi se pena ta pena ni dinga la pe shaba na pe shaba de langbo ta la so ba tin so de ta chi ta to ba ge to ba sha ba ta din de to chi re to din na yo ba na ji chi ju sha na ta ti ka su ti shu na.
So also text kind of begins with explaining a different meaning of these two term conceptual and non-conceptual. It says multiple senses in traditional, sense in translation of early Buddhist texts. So different text kind of Buddhist text explains a different kind of ways such as treasury of knowledge, um, distinguishing the middle from the extreme text, as well as the text on valid cognition. So, beginning with the treasury of knowledge, Abhidharma Kosh, the text kind of, um, explains these two concept or word conceptual and non-conceptual. When engaging the object, inquiry is a mental factor that engage in a coarse way, and then and analysis is a mental factor that engage in a subtle way. So in this case, the first one, inquiry, the Tibetan word tokpa, which also in English would be conceptual, is interpreted as a more kind of coarse way of engaging, coarse consciousness or cognition engaging in its object, while analysis is considered as a more kind of subtle way of engaging its object. And um, and then the another text distinguishing the middle from the extreme. In this text, there's two: the conceptual construction, or again the word conceptual, and the non-conceptual. Minds and mental factors that are mistaken in having a dualistic appearance and are included within the levels of any of the three limbs are said to be conceptual constructions. So conceptual are, considered as mistaken in having a dualistic appearance. And then the third text, valid cognition, Dekyong's Compendium of Valid Cognitions, defines conceptualization or conceptual thought in terms of those cognition that apprehend their objects by way of applying a linguistic name or a type that is a class to the object. In other words, the object is qualified by some form of universal. The word used here is universal. The earlier text that we studied, the word used was image generality. If you remember, image generality, sound generality, that was the word. So, such as we see, again, quoting from the another sutra, this is an elephant, a horse, a chariot, so on, and thought is a conceptualizations or conceptual thoughts.
Ondire ta tanda di ne tsi shung sum di do ta di chö tang usan nam tsu tsima kundi dende ki sung ba di chi ta ne chik tösul manda wa ki ene chik kung do da dende chi re ze de dina sung do ta chi ta ne ne tok ba tang to me ki ene chik tön dang dende din ma chik yong de sha ondi chik ma shu yin din.
So these are the three different interpretations that kind of we see at the beginning of the text from three different, Buddhist classic texts: treasure of knowledge, distinguishing the middle from the extreme, and valid compendium of valid cognition. And then the actual kind of explanations comes later in the text.
다 다나 진디나나 조금 지단에 단단 아주 딩엔 라인에 로리 듄 조사라 로리 듄 기나네 로리 듄 기나네 직 로리 원시 원스 말에 로리 듄 말에다 원시 원시 원베시바 투요라 나 투지즈만 투디 나네 또박 하세요레 또메 가세요레 주주바이테 지바이나 다디나 수만에서 다란데 원시 원베시바는 또 또메나 이 이실라 ombe shebadela tome onshinem tome dan igi shebala ene tome dan toba dan tome niga yore se sumudo dana je odini to yore se shibir ringajila rangi kangla jubi yulte te dadi odi yore dadi daine topa dan tome la de kandejila mo jingere se tu sambala dadi 시비 리가지라 라니 칸라 주비 율데 테가 리제텔라 아니 또 메기 셔바스 거기 네 율데 뭐서 급도 리바텔라 아니 직 토메다 페나 둥지 pomba 통에 미시도 양시비 리 망보식 아니 율데 테가 미 통미도 바 율 대단 차다베 아니 낭자 리 다오도지 통화텔라 테네 아니 직 대군이 주바텔라 아니 가리 tokpa sene shukure sungido atina la su pejana dis naji ene pena chik nganzu tate tusu kesangi ene se tempe lo tabu pe tende resha tende shi pe te tate tusu ene kesangi ene tekar minna ta odi resha odi te chik shuna tokpa ke
So conceptual and non-conceptual, as we talked earlier in the earlier in the earlier topic of sense and mental consciousness. So here also we can see kind of differentiation from that perspective. It's on page 66, second paragraph. X explained above, sense consciousness is non-conceptual, whereas mental consciousness may be, either conceptual or non-conceptual. And how can we kind of differentiate between these two? Certain types of consciousness directly cognize whatever object they engage. So when consciousness engages or apprehends its object directly, straightforward, nothing in between, and based on this, they are said to be non-conceptual, and those would be non-conceptual. And the example here cited is eye consciousness seeing a vase or pot. Eye consciousness seeing a pot directly, sort of nakedly raw, nothing in between. On the other hand, there are other consciousness that cannot perceive the object directly, but apprehend it by way of taking as their object something that partially resembles the actual object. And they kind of apprehend that object through something that sort of, that resembles so indirectly. And the example here mentioned is cognition that remembers yesterday's meal. Remembering yesterday's meals right now in your thought, you're using the image or something that resembles yesterday's meal, but it's not the actual meal. So such is the non-conceptual sorry, mental. No.
어디를 다 된다 디가우스 아니 단다 코랑기 천이도 어디 디왈라 둥기도 거기 돼야다 둥기도 이나 다 된다 또 받아 또 메기 된데 또 된데 뭐 좀바 단다 디니 하고도 빼 빼들라타네 kintu기요나 빼다 딜라탄라타네 다긴저디 올 빼두고도 직수는
Although the definition of these two will come later, but from this kind of presentation, you should kind of get the meaning, from the definition and the example. So Vishal was kind of asking, did you get the meaning of these two, conceptual and non-conceptual? What's your sounds?
다 디는마 다란자 지단에 다 도도 임발라 다 직다란 tsime shungdan dinde 장샤바 dinde 세이나 당한주 디는마 로기 다라 디는마 디치고양 지와단 dinde 직 요바에는 나나 되게 해서 주나디.
So we'll continue with the text, kind of in a brief. Again, we see a lot of quotes from the same text, valid cognition, Pramana text. And if you have any questions, you can just read, and immediately or straightforward.
어디래 대단다디 양 kumbato tadina ma kumbato mishite tome kumbato mishite mishite tome keshabada mishite kumba sunsin beshesu mi tumbe tse kumba yila charo charji tende yi keshabani toba inos te imbi kungdo ode namde keshunde number to dan sheten to shechen chen dingi de namde keshunde da shun nido tegi dewa de long ame yulte te dan te na wa tunchi dan te ne nang ko be lola ene toba dan long chime de tunchi dan mande be ene yul te gar na lola tomegi shebar sun se ta ti tunchi dan te mande se de sambala ta chi de ge ne tunde ta chi pumbale samba pumbe tende ha kone to bada magone to ni yongoro odi ondini sungoro.
The end of second paragraph on page 66. Furthermore, although an eye consciousness seeing a vase is non-conceptual, when the eyes are closed after having seen the vase, the appearance of the vase persists in the mental consciousness, and such a mental consciousness is conceptual. So again, you see here differences between conceptual and non-conceptual. Then we have two quotes from Dharmakirti's exposition of valid cognition. A cognition connected to concepts does not have a clear appearance of the object, and any cognition that has a clear appearance of the object is non-conceptual. When an object appears to a consciousness mixed with an object universal, again, the other word was meaning generality or object universal, then it is a conceptual consciousness. If a cognition directly perceives its object unmixed with the universal, then it is non-conceptual consciousness. So here you can see kind of differences are made from whether such cognition is mixed or unmixed with the universal. And
So the universal is conceptual.
던지던 제만데서 좀 뺀다 봄바기 천이 또네 하고 왔다 천이 마또 천이 봄바이 천이 마셔와이나 봄바 또요라 나 덴데도 시간라 숨심나 되기도 봄바이 천이 셴나 아니 다 봄바 지마치 컨디션 바디 아니 천이 하고 했더니 보야지나 때마이나 봄바 천이 마시나 봄바 또 쪽으로.
So object universal. So the difference is, you were saying, when it says unmixed or mixed with universal or not, there is a way that one can apprehend or understand the vase or pot without actually knowing the definition of the pot. There's that way of understanding as well. On the other hand, there's a complete understanding the pot with its, with its meaning. Chris, what did you ask?
Yeah.
Okay.
Dine tatanda digan la dara shungdi wacha digan la din ta digan la di wadi ki deshe digan di da rani di shungdi kanga la tsima namngi ki shungdi da di kangi shungdi ki ni dewa to rani zo maya ki wu shen koya yanla tuandu nyeni kebar to cheni chu yubal tabu rani ki zo tuandu nyecha kebar to cheni 기부당 대니라 되는 식인데 와다 된다 돌되는 단다 디컵서 될 단다 디 기부 간사 지게니 유바 손데와 텔라 테네 대게니 텔라갈 간사 유바 개겐라서 빙타 타기도 근데 딜라 테네 디 개버도 오지 숨겨서 디 단다 디 페이지 디르시 유바 제노 신데 당연히 당보 소소로 당보 네 간사 대당 아니 유바니 가 로송오진 되니 애니 기부데 유바 제노제 냠도 대다 초지도 돕는 진 전절기군은 이시 똑바송 되네 똑바게단지 요 어디 송데서 이거다
그거는 그게
다른 단다디 이거 세만남이 있어 단다디 제시 게임바디 와다 딩이 레서 로벤 초랑기 찍도 로벤 초랑기 세만 강라지도 와라지 개발단의 개발 전세
롱로 되게 롱도 되게 돼요.
롱디기 대셔도 어디다 도도도 어디 들으셔 다른 데 와들 이거다.
그게 리세 얘도 그런 롱으로다 롱고랑 되셔도 말이야. 대 롱고랑 단다 되셔.
어디 롱디기 대셔 대와 샤마이나 어디
라니조
조마이야 기부신 고이치 연락도 주로 와
So Schedule was reading this part on page 67, the second last paragraph. If one understands the attribute possessor, their relationship and the customary conventions posited, then by associating them, one apprehends the attribute possessor as qualified by some attribute. Such is the case in the expression quote and unquote staff holder. That cognition does not happen otherwise because one does not have that cognition if one does not cognize the things, that is, attribute and attribute possessor, their relationship, and the conventions expressing them. Do you what on the law say?
Di wadela o tome on shine kensun sang de kyo deba ingese de odi de taron dinala yoba na jinchi pena tanda di da gi kola ta chik pumbal tanda di ta gi kola di yungu de pena te wanshi gi kensun sang ta ka wanshi da ta wangbu sheba de kensun sang tela teni te 상황을 기 개원도 도기 제손도 미체도 페나 팔랑 동이 미시기 겐숨 상황을 때 텔레비 미시 개비세 팔랑 동이 미시디 겐숨 상나 다 미겐 타겐 테마타겐 숨상나 팔랑디 도그레 저러 랑긴 되베 체도 아니 다른 도다나 팔랑이도 통 팔랑이도 통라지 좀발 타양 지금 로다네 소소기 더바기 파기 지 따레서는 로다네 따니도 따니도 통라지 따라 통도를 텔 또데 발란지비 로토바니 소소 따바데 르체도 쮸니 챈도 셈비치 랑게 로도니비 케버 유출 손데세 좀발 탄다 디가서 갈라는 질 발란지 니 토피가 수 발란 토발라 켄숨사 발란 토바기 로티기 니 켄숨상 거라 켄숨상 호텔라테니 니 발란데 토고라 야직 데데니 한 더베기 왕게 직 거기 따직 더베기 왕게 거기 따레 때 로타네타 발란마르 따레 제데 좀발 따라 토르야도 데니 로키 용거스 데 온데니 저 네 로소소르키 양아냐 토바토 데니 요레 숨다 개바데니
Then at the end of page 68, a non-conceptual sense consciousness arises from its three conditions having been met, whether one wants it to arise or not. For example, when the three conditions of an eye consciousness, seeing a cow, have been met, and that eye consciousness arises, three conditions we talked earlier: the object, object condition, dominant condition, and then immediately preceding condition. Then eye consciousness arises. Even if one were to deliberately try to think it as a horse, one will still see the cow. So to see the cow, one has to have these three objects, these three conditions, and with these three conditions, you can see the cow. Conversely, with respect to thought conceiving something as a cow, if one were to deliberately think it to be otherwise, it is possible to change that thought of a cow. Such a difference between a conceptual and non-conceptual cognition is stated. So, but on the other hand, as says here, conversely, even though if it is a cow, but you want to kind of see that as a horse, you can have that in your mind. You can say that this is not cow, this is horse. You can have that thought. You can have such a thought. So then there's a quote from the again, certain men of valid cognition.
yang toba de chidane toba la di yor de na toba dende ki yongro hata dende nyowa ro tanga to chimare dende to la na so dende to toba ro ki yongdo.
So this kind of conceptualization of what was said here, this is although it is a cow, but thinking that this is not a cow, this is a horse, you can have such thought. Such thought can arise, which again the conceptual thought can arise.
어디체 다 디니 마다야 단다 디니 츠만남들 주네 송비 다디 된다디 디와텔라 되도 긴 와다 토미킨 디디 연구되셔 생이데 단다디 츠만남데기 시간 칸라 다든지 데니텔라 토바 인시지 송 율칸라 데니 다든지 지송유도 체니 진베 셔바데니 율텔라 토바송 양 츠만남에 디체 니 셔바 츠만남에 셔바디 간신에 토바 셔바 셔제인 셔바 topani shobatan derung nawe shebate she shobatan derung war nawan jimbe lola topa sungwa topa ki tishi teni ta topa ki di to de tsanyi to de datun derung tun jimbe shenrik de ni tope ngo yinse.
Yes. Again, conceptual cognition, more on that. Or on page 69, second last paragraph. A consciousness is said to be conceptual cognition regarding an object if the consciousness that apprehends the object takes that object's universal, or meaning generality, or linguistic reference as its observed object. Then last paragraph. So the definition, now comes the definition. Definition of conceptual cognition is construing awareness that apprehends word and referent as suitable to be associated.
That the touching the relationship between dala macam chiba to gyuki toban daji the tunchi kanro you to check nika soba you to miche the debal means and the ronson symbol immersion base pen tanda di any definite thing it is ulani dadun derons is gunzen to the so the tanda di gala pe dala macam chiba chunjung di any daji the tunchi any kaya rongaji you to cherunja nika soba you to miche gunzen de la tene and dadun derun to minzin derun to zimba se sumba village besata.
So in the definition, suitable to be associated, the significance of the phrase quote unquote suitable to be associated or mixed or suitable to be associated. In this definition is explained as follows. Some conceptual cognitions, such as one in the mind of a pre-verbal infant, take as their objects either the object universal or the word universal, but they do not take the combination of both as their object. So such an infant cannot have a both, but they can have one, Therefore, such cognitions do not apprehend word or referent as associated. Nevertheless, those cognitions apprehend them as suitable to be associated.
Ene ta tena je tayang toba de la ina toba tuntun ta tumi tun ta toba tuntun ta tumi tun se de zambala tanda diga na sumani ta toba tuntun ta tumi tun se de yore toba tuntun la wa ina chiki yul de kaptu thonga de la yul yoba yul de pena pumba thonga mishi de ki pumba toba de la pumba yul yora tene ta pumba de sha ta tapana ribon ranjin tobe mishi de ki ribon ranjin 미시 경우도 리본라 요마라 율 요바다 매바 개발적인 도바 된된다 되미 되는지 숨기로 내리겠다 디프로.
And then on page 70, second paragraph, the classifications of conceptual cognitions, there are two, and one that can concur with their object and those do not. So concur with their object basically means one which has an actual object. For example, eye consciousness perceiving a pot or vase. When the vase is in front of eye consciousness, that would be, conceptual cognition concur with their object. And the second, that those do not, meaning that those don't have an object in front of the consciousness. For example, would be conceptual cognition of the rabbit hair. The rabbit hair doesn't exist, but you can have such thought, conceptual thought, and there's no such object,
다나지 봄바디 봄진 도바기 주율당 리본 리본 라디 리본 란진 도베 에네 주율 다란데 직송에 디나 숨바나지 주야 율도들 디 다란데 샤그레스.
But both would be, the object of engagement of such cognition, as said here. An example is the conceptual cognition apprehending a pot. A conceptual cognition whose engage does not exist is called a conceptual cognition that does not concur its object. And the example, apprehending a rabbit's horn. So both rabbit's horn and the pod is the engaging object of the consciousness, but one exists and one doesn't.
어디지 다 디와들 연결돼 양 또바들 고왕게 예나 아니 민초도 민초도 바다 든초도 바니 니제데 숨도다 베 대투기 민다 타니기 든자는 짐벨로라 아니 민초도 바 베나 가르살텔라 팔랑오년도 짐베 또바도 다다 타니기 제바디 율텔라 당보르 따바다 다 당보르 따바 다당 다티 치순자베 네가라 타니에 제자스 시 계지 된다 계주기 된 자는 집에 도발라 던져 도바스 스페나 기분디 유과 제능년 집에 도발도 되네 계지 계지 기불라 계주 유관자는 집에 이노스테 이노스타 단다 디간라야 단다디 민초르 도바다 던져 도바스 단다디 디나라 송바나지 다른 슈나티기도 야
Again, conceptual cognitions can be categorized into two, according to their purpose. In terms of purpose, can be categorized into two. So, as said in here, again, same page, third paragraph, conceptual cognition associating a word and a conceptual cognition associating a referent. A conceptual cognition associating a word is one that associates the word from the time of learning the linguistic convention with the referent at the time of applying the convention as a classificatory one. An example is, quote unquote, a dapple thing is a cow. The difference between a linguistic convention and a classificatory convention is as follows. When a word is first applied to an object, that is a linguistic convention. And when that convention is used on later occasions, it is called classificatory convention. A conceptual cognition that connects a subject or predication with a predicated quality is called a quote-unquote conceptual cognition associating a referent. An example is the conceptual cognition, quote-unquote, this person is a staff holder. It cognizes by applying the predicated quality, unquote, quote-unquote, staff holder to the subject of predication, quote-unquote, this person.
어디 단다 디나 송바나지 페시 킹기 그래 지단에 단다 민초도 바 던저도 발라 해서바다 단다 디가나 롭지 디가나 링샤도 모두 지단에 팀에 슌라 덴소기 띵라 페 띵사보레 파 캬첨부첨부도 도이나 지단에 나라도 오지나 단다 덴디콜라 직 따뇽다 디나 시워시기 직 덴데 직 소솔라 직 고아 띵사부니도 가고도 말아이나 단다 디가슬라 단다 딘데 디가소데 롭스롭시 하고 그래 돼 이나 다직 띵 사보 파도 디sambal에 페나타 나저 단다 디 라바도스 타 발랑카르셀다 딘데라 페자니 총고데 띵 사바도네 페디 칼레 카고도 요르 단다 디 세미숑 캅스 직 다사다와 이나데 카리나
The categorization that we see here, according to the perspective, conceptual cognition associating with a word, conceptual cognition associating a referent, although here it is presented in a kind of simple, brief way. But if you go back into the actual sources of the, valid cognition commentaries, these are explained in extremely kind of detail and a very kind of extensive and profound. And so Geshe was saying from his own side, it is difficult to understand and grasp. One can go into extremely detail using kind of debate logic, ways, but hard to understand. But here it is presented in a simple and kind of, easy sort of way.
어디 단다 다디니 마타라 Continue what the yang tobatel tandati idan tobatel and that and change it tobata tension la dotope tobas auto jure toba sum grace the yang tobatel in this mundo penata divata
No, that's
ming and then that ming da jarwala teni keep toba ni da change tobata randi dinner sumuna generation adigitura and the inati can go at the kitchen was just to pena tote wandi kumbawo she shipping down dala tene give it to body don't give it double the was any 20 cent on totaba shenton zebani 20 shelan totabe toben pena yul ito mio wala ito wala totaba tabe suldi iki nam totabo ranyul kodo jowe cheshikla tabu tichi pedechi ranyul kodo jowe cheshikla mikbe tobani kodo jowe toba inze pena debe ene temba debe temba pomba mitaba zembe toba tabu suldi ilo tabu zete sombra tanda di ene toba ene daten chiki toba tenshen dan tobe toba kodo jowe toba sumdi ene de chik tsenye dan ene ta chik pe da cheba di sumdi sumdi shaba yedi kempo.
Also, on the last paragraph on page 71, we see again 3 types of conceptual cognitions. In some texts, 3 types of conceptual cognitions are explained. Conceptual cognitions that rely on a linguistic convention, conceptual cognition that superimpose something else onto their objects, and conceptual cognitions of that which is hidden. So the first one, conceptual cognition that arises in dependence on associating a name or linguistic convention, is the conceptual cognition that relies on a linguistic convention. An example is the conceptual cognition that arises in dependence on the statement, quote, "This bulbous thing is a pot," unquote, which expresses the proper use of the word or verbal convention for pot. Superimposing, the second one, superimposing something else onto an object or apprehending it to be other than what it actually is a conceptual cognition that superimposes something else. An example is the conceptual cognition that, with inappropriate attention, superimposes attractiveness onto an unattractive object. A conceptual cognition focuses on something that is hidden, the third one. Hidden to one is conceptual cognition of that which is hidden. And an example is a conceptual cognition apprehending a pot to be impermanent. No.
This one. Odichi that Taranti to Peshaku Dilla Tandati and the Loba Dilla and Mago in Tiwat Nana Dito.
So because you said we just read it, and if you don't understand it, you can just ask or bring question.
What is it? Tati cause relative cosity of Ratanda Tati Wadela and Tatanda Diki Handela and Toboki sing it and Rosan Tati or Wadela Tandini Wadela and Tomeki sing it. Tatun Tiruto Zimbi Shenrita Charlie Shepherd Tomeki that's Charlie Shepherd Tomeki in that Tometala and Tomeki Shepherd Tundunda Tometini Handa Chikwachi Rangi Jewel Yubit Tomeki Shebala ranking juyul yobe tomegi shebal tomegi sheba tuntun pena pumjin mishi pumbanjime mishi ta kawanjime mishi to tometana tarang ranking juyul mebe tomegi shebala ine tomegi sheba ine tumitun pena karingompo na wanshi karingompo na wanshi ta karingompo na wanshi ta taji tanyi suna wanshi ta hus tadi tomegi ine tsanyi da yewa ine tometala ya toba tuntun da tumitun.
Then non-conceptual cognition. It's on page 72, middle of the page. The nature of non-conceptual cognition is to be a moment of awareness that is free from any construing awareness that apprehends word and referent as suitable to be associated. Again, there are 2 types: non-conceptual consciousness that concurs with the object, and non-conceptual consciousness that does not concur with the object. A non-conceptual consciousness which engage objects exist is called a non-conceptual consciousness that concurs with the object. Examples include an eye consciousness apprehending a pot and an eye consciousness apprehending a pillar. A non-conceptual consciousness whose engaged object does not exist is called a non-conceptual consciousness that does not concur with the object. Examples include a sense consciousness to which a snow mountain appears blue, and a sense consciousness to which one moon appears as 2.
어디 지라다 단다 디가서 지단에 단다 또바다 또메시고레 단다 디 또바다 또발라에 간디스키기레 또멜라에 간디스키기레 된데 숭고라다 단다 디가서 배 찾아와이나 단다가서 다콜라치에 잠발라 봄바 또발라 봄바 천이 셰마시 된데 제바적으로 봄바 또비가 봄바 또겐지 간사도 오지 찾아와이나 데 또발라 천이 시시방도 조고 먹고 저 내네 봄바 인치미치 또 거다 먹고 다 근데 이니 제바 제기 시도 근데 차고다 다시 랑아도 되어tillen 가서 다 근데 대자 시작으로
So in here, when presenting conceptual and non-conceptual, its definition and how they kind of arises as a cognition within us, this all becomes, we can say, sort of the basis of further analysis. Example we were using earlier, when you are seeing a part, does that mean you need to understand the definition of the part? Again, to go back, does that makes you to kind of identify part as a part, or do you see part as a part, or in order to see a part as a part, do you really need to understand the definition or meaning of the part? So all of this becomes kind of further kind of analysis or maybe investigate, which maybe we can later discuss in the Q&A.
어디 제다단다 수 10% 제시하는데
So we'll take a break here.
소디 제발 요새 다디나 단다 디나 수만나진 기타라 디잖아 다라 디 라스트 데
So at the end of this section, page 72,
좀더 오지
the summarized version. In brief, conceptual mental cognition and a non-conceptual sense cognition are different in various ways, including whether the cognition's object appears clearly, the cognition apprehends word and reference as suitable to be associated, the cognition depends on a linguistic convention. When this or that objects appear in cognition, it appears to be fused with an object universal. A subject and its properties appear separately. The cognition apprehends a subject and its properties as mutually associated. The cognition qualifies its object with a class, a quality, or an action. The cognition is caused by remembering a linguistic convention. The cognition is qualified by time. The cognition apprehends earlier and later times in combination, or the cognition occurs due to the proximity of its observed object.
어디는 됐다 아니 지단에 되어 디콜레 되어이나 나나 되게 때문에 지원지 되어 컨디션에 되어 틀린다고 지는 디죠 어디 나로는
Do a discussion if you have any questions from what we have covered today or questions in general.
Is inquiry course and
당보고 똑바로 줘발라야 돼. 똑바로 줘발라야 돼. 증증버도 시발라라. 직 증어 똑바로 증어지 직 시발 가지 절렀어.
생활의 시바 가르치는 레세 단다디 다디 생활의 시바세 단다 디간라니 직 똑발라나 덴데실라 그래 또 토멜라나 덴데실라 딩이 개발체네 디콜라 덴데 생활의 시바 기 개발 용기다 덴데치네 자네 용어레스 쉬다
Here why we have this difference of cause and subtle is actually to help understand conceptual and non-conceptual. So in this case, conceptual, 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 con
pena da digi da tutagi to so do da digi semba do khagaro chidani da toba da chobala de tonta rulu do di tanda wajin samana je tadun tadun tsimbi sheri da di so kelingiro da ina tanda digala tanda di yondu sambala digi ni da chik so gi de so gi ni chenyi do jigani de chik da chik shiba tsingwa de la ni tsing na be chupe ni semjong de la ni toba da ini shibi nabe jube ni senju de la ni choba toba chi toba da dine chini chungara nga chungdon dawa de
Inquiry, as as said here, engage in a course way. Basically, from the this particular text, treasure of knowledge explanations or presentation about what conceptual is, according to this. So we usually say our own system. The actual definition that we usually have is, as we saw later in the text, the definition, that was the real definition that we stick into. But the other kind of interpretations is, then we see three different, the one of which is conceptual cognition as engaging in a course way, and then analysis as a more kind of in a subtle way. And this kind of shows the differences between conceptual and to kind of to understand the conceptual and non-conceptual in this case.
Would analysis be non-conceptual?
That deal any the jobal ne yawachi zeme and the jobal edit karza tomel kogurelo.
tanda di ni chidani choba le de zambala cheba chayaki dindishi la kogdo tanda di ngala de toba de choba dindishi gani kodu yisar peche ina nga di ni kogri zini tachi su chudan yasimindo ina ta choba le de zambala tachi cheba chayaki di dogujira di chobu chagora
tomel kumara tomel kogurelo.
tanda di gani tanda shundi gani taran di sunero yare koku yisar ina tanda di tome la kuna digido ina di yada choba tse zambala choba tsi kuna di taji che ro jilo chagido choba wonder ko resena digido taji chida tanda di
So you can understand it in that way as well, conceptual and analysis as a more.
tanda digi shungene subject gani ne toba na choba ki kebar sungi de zambala taran subject zodo di taran sungido dila tena yan digido china ina 다 만화로 치는 성무당 거에 개점 버려.
저 하람 계시던 이가 줘발래디
또바다 줘봐 세트 삼바라 또 또멜라 디 고용 고기도 하다나 디가 강디긴 sabject 코난들 또바다 줘바니 개발제 돼서 막 저는 저니 셰바데나 다 타니티 가가 두두고 얘는 고난디기도.
So using although the way the text lay out, you can take in that sense, conceptual and non-conceptual. So conceptual is more kind of, as said here, inquiry, and non-conceptual is more kind of analysis. But again, he was saying he wasn't exactly sure whether that would be completely kind of, true or not. But the way layout of the text seems to be saying that way, conceptual and non-conceptual, kind of how to differentiate between these two.
지단에 뒤견 남긴데 간주 똑바라 또메라 디삼발 단다 쩌발라디 타니데 베치시고 단다 디갈라다 전에 시에도 삼발 디네시 삼발 디모타나 디기도.
Usually we don't kind of use in a sense equivalent of non-conceptual to analysis, but from the tertiary of knowledge, Abhidharma kind of presented in that way.
What is the definition of analysis in this context?
Shibala deni.
단다 시발라이드 zambal라 지단에 시바제데 zambal라 타니에 코란라 삼노다니 먼저 시모요 베네 잠바스도 먼저 잠바 시모레 시십세기도 디르다이야 단다 디간라 베스 치글라 삼노다니 된 살보 코 살보도
So the meaning of the word in here, refers to kind of more of the sense of precision. Yeah, precision. Going into more kind of in depth or more in detail. Could you say more detail as compared to the course? Any other questions?
Surprisingly, I'm fresh out today.
Question.
Sure.
So is the word referent?
Mm-hmm.
Could you describe that a little more? And is it always linguistic referent or are there non-linguistic?
Okay.
Universal can be a non-linguistic referent.
Reference to time looking at the specific.
Dada nyinle.
Dada translate.
Hala.
Then sick. Da Jadun Jerun Zimbala Shura. Jada Tunlade.
Na chidani dara dala tanda dikala dura.
The Tsenyi de Golane. Jadun Jerun the Zimbe Sherry lady.
Dachi ta tunchi la de zambala te pena ngazo ngofu la de zambala chik ngofu chigi mingro. Tunchi la de zambaya tunde ya ta chi la kebe tunchi ki mingla tunchi se ta jugro. Dachi ta tunchi.
Kala me can to Taji to Koneson the Komazo.
Dachi se de zambala chi la pena ngofu la de zamba ngofu chi la kebe ni dichi. ngopo rere mingma dewa che chile kyabe dende chila tunchi zete soma tunya tarang tun chile kyabe tunchi dende chila kukata ta pena tanda di kaso chitane dha kuranda tun nicha ta chik ha ko rongwa che ko rongwa zete sambala tanda di kangla wadela di sungsong di zhuba na jingi tarang tere ta dachi zete samba 용을 캬바기 다질라 고라 던치즈도 좀 던질레 캬베니 던질라 베나 단다타라 모포드도 좀 모포치기 민도 그죠 봄바스도 좀 발라 봄바치기 민도 그죠 그런지도
What was your question again?
So reference always linguistic or can they also be non-linguistic?
Dale the town of Shadada Tuna, Dada Kaduniga, Dadi, any section about linguistically. Dada Kaduniga, that thing is Google way, Damading is Google way.
tatila chitani chiki shuni shiri zambala daina injimichi chik da ko mogo da chik gogore chitani de tsani dagi dila ko ba da mogo ba chiriki tsoba yore penanga zuna gyunla daina nashiki nyecha yin ko nashiki kogo da mogo ba tindiki tsoba yore dana di toba de yongores pena chik 다기 definition 도라 탈람치지 말로 번 덤베셔자 남다 아도시 송거로 탈람치 대지단에 탈람 진지 말로 번 쇼자 남다도 주나디기도 언데지 송거 되나다 대나 대비 캡마 캡세 저버서용도 상발라 당아주 간사규지 직 배는 넘버도 오시니 셈나니 대로 된대요 대니 추전을 라니 총거라 다이나 직 켈렘바다 말렘바 지릭도 오시간라 용거다 삼도 치바다 제
Again, it's why I was thinking about this is because of the translation, how it was used in here and how it was used in other classic texts. So when we talk about, I was looking at the page 69, the definition word and referent, word and referent in the definition of conceptual cognition. Word and referent, in this case, a word and referent here, another word would be just a sound, in the Tibetan sound. So they're talking about the referent when we talk about the referent or sound, in the text, it's presented as, sound does not necessarily has to be kind of linguistic convention, or it has to be kind of maybe meaningful or has a meaning. There are some sound which, without no meaning, and some sound can have a meaning. And again, to kind of look from another slightly different way, whatever that you hear or whatever that you apprehended by, by ear consciousness, the object would be anything. It can have a meaning. It doesn't have a meaning. No meaning. It varies. There's no definite. Doesn't. So, although there's a definition of the I don't know, in this case, referent or sound, but so you're saying, it is open for debate, when you ask that. So we could have kind of, when we do recitation mentally, whether that sound is, maybe can we hear it or not? If not, whether it is a sound or not. So it's open for debate, open for discussion. I mean, feel free to kind of further, clarify or ask question.
단다 디컵도 될란다 코란 치보질라 삼바다와이나 네직 나위 년 투베질라 아니 다세난디기도 단다
So here, when we use word, again, I was looking at the sound. Usually, sound in this case, I mean, the general case of saying the general sense is something that is that can be heard, that can be apprehended by ear consciousness.
오늘 지단에 아쉬운라 직 안쪽에 송당 된데라 차 도와이나 아직 인다 인고 먹고 된데 제지도래 지금 저거 전에요
가를.
지단에 다 상기 송 아주 송이나 다인고 다 상기 송이나 다인고 먹고 된데 기양 디어
So if there's also a debate on whether Buddha's teaching is expressed in sound or not. Again, you're saying it's up. There's a debate on that. It's yeah, it's open for discussions or debate. ¿Cómo son? I didn't hear.
직빈디 여르베스 라비데스 디 지단행아 저 추엘라 단다디 순도 삼발라 디로 일라나 디고로 페나가 저기 셈네 지는 pecha kyora de oji wa nga to le yidin yuna khanin drama de ne semni samne de tyen joro odi zo yang sung de chidani shoja namda re dayin main dayin bala ne nasi nyacha ko mogo tende ki choba chegor tapena donje ba mai be kazaki ki tenje ngoto gin chojen se lagure.
What was your question?
So there's debate over Buddhist teaching.
Yeah. Chua the Maria Tangi Gishla Rangi to Maji Sangi Sumina, Karlambe, one day more on just what on the Gune. Sangi Sumina dying Gume.
Oh, the pen at Odi than the pen. Nanzuki Sangi Suns in a pen attention moto gento, Lolas in the Genji, in the same Kansai, Chick Semna, Kyogoro. The Kyorwa the any Dare, that Kyorwa the any chick soon anta resort, the Chagordina, Dutch Agomaro, Dying Balangan Tunga, the Digiti Yor. That tension on the sensation and take carry social, you look at a lot in Jibin, semi dinner, semi sun the day.
For example, text, like ornament realization or any other text that if we memorize, and after memorization, if you recite it by heart, if you do recitation in your mind, and although the text is what we call it's Buddha's teaching, pure kind of expressions or true expressions, since it is not audible, is that a sound or not? So again, so we were saying that kind of debate, there is that kind of a debate or arguments. So sound, does it has to be auditory or not, or does it has to be expressed verbally or not? It's open to questions.
Yeah, I thought I understood sounded.
Okay.
Not sounded worded reference until Geshe started explaining reference, and now I'm not so sure. The way I'm now understanding it, okay, what I was thinking is that the word was, the word that we use to define the concept, and the concept, like pot, the word pot is the word, and then pot, but it refers to the concept of pot. And now I'm thinking that's not what he's saying, because if referent is a sound, and maybe I have it backwards, is pot the actual sound of the word pot, or the word is the meaning of the Greek. I don't understand what else.
The Quran to connotate again, Quran Kodanshara didn't.
I don't understand how sound relates to it.
Okay, let me Dadun Derin the Zimbe Sheri, Dadate, I think you take on Dadan Digital word reference and your daughter. The Quran Kodan
That would deep on them giving to Dracoran
Dada Tuna Shura, the Geshe enough the Pumkoran pet the Pumado shas, especially the Pumbalo is Muko Darwa.
Oh, did it.
Any the Pumba realized the same on Samedi, any tick on this decision of Kosovo Charman.
On the Nilana, Odin Pumba raised in a tapena Pumbati, Pumba let is about Dare. That Pumbegi Tani to the Najuna Pumbadina and to the Shapsham Chugi to Genuvasi. Could you Tani the Hagona, Pumbiton Hago to Gilashana Dido?
Turn the heart,
To the Shapshum, to there was Shapshum, but to there was Shapshum, but Chugi to Genuvas and it under Shunusumba, the lizard, the lizard. Tadi Pumba in Bahagoala, Taodi, the Kogo touch the Pumba, one in Bahagoala, the Hago, the Kogo, which is out.
Maybe, yeah, maybe I have used in a flip. Maybe there was, maybe I created the problem with the translation. So I was specifically kind of using particular, kind of sentence so that he can get clear understanding. Again, I'm using the word and reference. So when you said, when you use the example pot or vase, that is again, that is a sound. I guess maybe in this word, maybe, it should be wood. Pot or the vase is the wood. And the reference here is the meaning. When you understand that, the definition of the pot, then you have, this is a pot. So that is the reference. And the pot itself or the vase, that sound is the wood here.
So the referent would be a universal.
And twenty any 20 that they go to 20
20 December tandayang Kuran Dachida 20 December ko Chikuran Samloji Tani Sar. Tandatun Terutun Zimbisharikse.
Tadil Honda Senyidilism, Senyidism, Konan took to other Senyidilism, but Senyidi Chirwalad, Pumbasama Chapting. Yeah, so that definition, you can say that definition is a universal of the or universal to the all parts, all ways.
Then a Pumba Zambala, Dajidoja, Pumbala, Pumba in Damida Pumba, Serda, Mulda, Kita, Tachik, Dam, and Dendiki Pumba Damida Yonchugra. Dig in Dajija, the Pumbit there, Tachik Pumba Chiki Chachakor.
So when you have this, the word or the sound, waves, or part, that itself is, sound generality or sound universality. It can apply to every existing part or ways, but then within that we can have a particular, part made from gold or, in terms of size.
Chitani Tanda Tsani Chokanda Gangi Tsani, Chodakanda Gangi Tsani Nare, Tanganzo Juni Tsani Dende Shagore, Tadi the Tsani de Chude Puna, Bombay Nare, Kare Chokanda Kare, Hakoala, the Tsani Toko Mogo, the Chitani, Shunla Chaviko, Zobachevore. Tangaran to Samlo Tawaina, Tadi Chik Tsani de Mashewaina, the Hamago, the Matoba, the Chagri Chagmare, the day and Zobare, Zobachevore. 다직 하고 대하 본바하고 와라 본배천이 하고 거래 그거 말해서 넘기는 제고 라고라 어디 그거를 그거 말해 대체 본배천이 한 마고네 본바하고 가나 여야대 여러 되나다 먼저 중기 조단다 직 된지지가 된지지는 저버치네 직 레레레레 라인이 직 거래는 천이 된대 여래.
So in the text, scriptures, it talks about, it gives the definition of the entity, for example, pot or vase, the bulbous and then closed bottom, able to maintain. And when it gives the definition of the particular object, like a pot, then, it raises the question, to really kind of understand pot as a pot, do you really need to understand the definition or not? Because there are cases where you recognize pot as a pot without actually knowing its definition. But in the text, it kind of, takes to that kind of a debate whether one needs to really understand the definition, or with the definition, or without definition, does one really identify pot as a pot or not?
You have to understand the definition of function.
That is
That the 분보에는 분보하고 할 분배기 생이다 제대로 하고 그러거든.
어디 삼로 지단에 단단한데 본바도 선이도 접어도 된데 접어이나 본바도 벌 본배 선이 하고 된데 순고래 당하란도 삼로 당한데 본바 다디에 본바 선이 하마고 벌 본바도게 여러 다이나 다 선이 본바 된데 갈라 자다 초거 되나 된데 접어지고 다 된데 삼로 다야서.
In the text, when debate, it comes to the conclusion that, in order to sort of recognize pot as a pot, one needs to understand the definition of the pot. But in our ordinary sense, it doesn't has to be. You can just know the pot as a pot without actually understanding, the definition of the pod.
지단에 또 발라 가리 품바 또 바다 데리 가리 추칸다 칸또 발라 디기네 게 만다와 이나레 가리 만다와 이나레 저지 엔단다 자다 만다와 이나레 디기네 다도다 디기티스 롭제 하마고나 아니 디또 또라이디 용사마라 방아라 삼라 지단 용서를 경우는 삼라 당와이나
칼럼 권실 봉보
봄바 네페네 봄바터 보지 봄바터 봄바이나레 추가리 간다 칸에 하고와라
하고
디 디기 던도 오지 다치 케리다 가리 차이네나 만다와데 요르데 디기 던도 롭지 하고 걸 때마도 가서 데데 최대다 방아서 하고 두면다 소마로
So generally to recognize again, I was not sure about the word, the translation of the word Tibetan word Tokpa can be
하고
in recognize. So I'm using it just in order to recognize ways as a ways. In general way, one has to have some kind of information of what pod is to recognize pod as a pod, regardless of what language that you are using. So you have to have some understanding of what pod looks like, or you has to have some information, even using that word or sound. And without that kind of information, you won't.
찍어지냐 때는 싱기 단다디 싱깅 볼 세야데 싱깅 볼데 타니데 하마고나 딜라디니 싱깅 볼데 콜미딜라 하고도 마로 디기 타니 롭지고 하고 고라
단위하고 오르라고.
디기에네 던도데 디기
전다하고 오.
던다세나데 찬이세나데 다 거기 싱깅 볼세데 라구라 딜라 싱깅 볼세데 다 지용기 타니 진자라 디디티스 하마고나 콜 디레즈니 모테단 코나 요마라 디 하고 고서라 주가르데 가리나 디기 천이 코나 고마데 하마고이나 디기 던도로 하고 고서라 지단 땅아서 최대다 데토발레 디기 천이 데 하고 천이 데 또나 데토 또 그래서 순거 근데 주고서라
So when you use an example singing ball, to understand singing ball as a singing ball, one first has to have some kind of information or understanding or maybe identification of what singing ball is. So with that knowledge, then you're kind of using the word, you understand what the singing ball is. So it has to have some kind of information.
다치보즈나 다데 코라 디셈바데 고고다 이나 디기도 다디 페나 치다는 간도 삼로다야 다단다 달라야다 발라 파줄라야다 디기 타녀디 치도네 그런 중에 컨디도시 간라 요레 디에네 치기 섬수도 예제
간디도 저리열나
달라네 컨디스타레 파줄라네 컨디스타레 킬라네 컨디스타레
So she was asking generally, when we think about the designation on labels such as horse, a dog, how or in what way we came up with such a designation? Is there a meaning, or is how? Do you have any questions? Do you have any thoughts why we called a dog or horse a horse?
근데 단다 디간라네 페나 버추도제나 버추기에네 치케 노 젠제데 좀바다 치 따다만도 개발 권한기에네 치 징발라 덴데 치 덴데 요와 덴데 단다 디간라 페간라 용도 덴데 치 선배 덴데 다 링지도 거네 다치 단다 요르다 디나 중나라 덴데 요르다 덴데 용고르다 덴데 디도 또치 간조 치 삼로도 오세나 저시도 오세나 덴데 이 뜻직 삼로다긴 시대 디토레스는 라바다데 근데 셀라 디죠 승인 좀
So in the text, it was saying, when giving a label or name, such as a cow, the cow has a particular features, such as dewlap, that makes cow a cow, or that makes a cow a separate from other. So there are specific kind of attributes or features that identifies cow as a cow. So there's a basis for there's a such basis, in order to differentiate one labeling from another labeling.
다 어디 다 딘디 시간을 잖아 되게 대실 대야 가서 생년에 딘디 콜라치 되어요나 나나 되게 돼서 다 드린딘 망아 되지.
So you can bring, if you have a question of similar type or in the same kind of line, you can bring in the future as well. Today we'll stop here.
Curious,
Yeah.
sorry, if there's time. What is the categorization, or how do you think of like when you're listening to music? In that I particularly like just instrumental. So I hear a guitar playing. I could approach it from an analytical mind and say, that note is middle C. I recognize that's a sound from guitar. Or oftentimes I'm just sitting and I'm listening to the music. My ear, I'm assuming, would be having the direct perception of that music, but then my brain, the experience of it, I'm not consciously like analyzing it, thinking about it, and I use consciously in the general sense. But yet then my body has physical sensations. I have an emotional response to it. Like, that, looking at that, I could then categorize an emotional response if I wanted to. But when, like, my body's reacting, but I'm not thinking about, say, like a song with lyrics or like any sort of real object, would that be considered non-conceptual? It seems like it's not entirely non-conceptual.
근데 저거데 고랑기 념윤시에서 디 똑바로 동매를 외로도 동매시바 배셔 동매 배셔시는 고랑다 시에 년기도 신으로 시에 년도 고랑 시에 고랑다 년기 매신데 고랑다 로젤 인도 유스로 로젤 통화 진데다 년디 좀 로젤이 게 고도디 아니 로자 기타르 기게는 기타르 기게레스 다디 칼로레 왕bungu 송비 칼로레 셰발라오레 이네 고랑 셈 나로 단데 개고제다 제바도들 개 지금에서 내게 고랑라 디 게디 다디 코알 때는 겐셈 나로라 소불 서로로 레이도사 다 칼로르치기 지게 서로 담을 레쳐로 다디 인데 좀 디기 셰바데 간다 된다디 도메 셰바르 웰로도
이제 다 돈당 아주 단다 디간라니 거기 똑바다 또메라에 가서 천이다 세질을 섬었다네 딜라 저나 딜라 섬었다네 이거 빼나니 똑바라티 섬발라 아니 직 따티 율디 요바제다 또메라티 섬발라 따치 카레 차라다 나와 가리 바이나 율디 메바 빼나단 천지 따 똑바도 또메기 천지샤서 빼나 똑바기 천지라 아니 율도 저 섬었다네 봄바다 ene tome ki tsenjila ribon raja so topa chidan topa ki topa de la ni ale tendu da temitin tome ki tsenjila la topa tendu da temitin se tisambala taranta chik tenda di pagi yul yoba da meba ki kebar pagi di yoba ta chik soso ki ta nyesa ki yul dang tende pagi di chik yoba ina ta chik topa do chawar meba ina tome do chawar ta di topa do chasar vi da pagi yoba do chasambala
고랑이 계실 저도 거기서 고랑이 소본을 다드 뮤직 로작 다셔로 디콘의 소본을 서로 담아를 레이도사 되는데 서로 담아를 레이자면 다드 서로 레이죠디 아니 다드 엔디 다 똑바로 동매래라고
달라 텐엘레도 좀 또바 디 용사디 다로
아니 다 요로 디가
다디 요로 맞아 소소디 맞아
이거 저도 유요 말을래도 유요 말을래도
요나 또바로 메나 또메
최선 동매래래 맨 저거 예
또바 레스나 또바 레라고
So the answer he was saying came down he was saying conceptual more kind of because when we look back into the definitions of these two in a symbol form conceptual cognition has a actual object in order to induce such recognition or consciousness, in your case kind of emotion. So there is a object, and because of object present, it kind of induces certain kind of emotional responses. But then when we talk about non-conceptual, we talked earlier, non-conceptual doesn't has kind of direct object in front of it. If we use an example, the rabbit horn, you can have just a thought without in. But in your case, Geshe was saying it looks more kind of conceptual because of the presence of the object, in your case, the music that you are hearing, and then causing emotional responses. So it would be more, he say, more kind of conceptual cognition.
Yes. Chancho semcho rimbo che ma che panam kenjuro che kewa nyamba me pa yang kone kondo pewar sho kari rave kowe shinkan de pendang dewa ma lun chungwe ne chire sewa tenzin gyatso chabe sidi bardo denjo proje jabo bawe kedara kemba dan kondo sambo deyang tije Teta kunje cheso talo je gyawa dida tamje rabdu ngo tuzum shebe gyawa tamje ngo kanla chodo nga ba de rin gewe sawa di sambo cheje rabdu ngo waragi in English.
May the supreme jewel, the body that is not arisen, arise and grow, and may that which is arisen not diminish, but increase more and more. In the lands of the Snow White Mountains, the source of all happiness and benefits, flows in the person, cherish, changing their also, please remain until samsara ends. Just as the Bodhisattva Manjushri attained omniscience and the Samadhi to so how do I dedicate these merits, train and follow in their footsteps? As all the victorious Buddhas of the past, present, and future, place dedication as supreme. So how do I of my marriage for all these to provide.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.